My name is Jaime Casap, and before I get started, I want to lay out some contact information. As my daughter says, email is for old people. And so I wanted to talk about where I do some communicating. So I communicate on Google+, I communicate on Twitter. It's a great platform to be able to have a conversation. You ask me a question, I can answer it, and everyone else sees it. Great way to keep a conversation going with hashtags and so forth. So I wanted to make sure you had that information. I also write a blog on education. And I'm behind a couple of posts that are sitting in my Google Drive, but I'm catching up, and I write some things on education and technology and education and so forth. All right, so what I want to talk about the next hour or 50 minutes or so is to talk about where we are with education technology, where things are going, talk about this generation of kids that are coming into our school system and what we're seeing in this space. And so I wanted to make sure we cover all these things. And to start with, and Kevin mentioned this conference, and I was here last year, I spoke last year, and it was great, and we had lots of excitement going on, lots of energy, and this year I think it's even tenfold, and I'm excited about next year and the possibilities of having great conversations, having great interactions with folks. And the reason I think that we have this passion in education is because we recognize that education can be a differentiator. Education can be a silver bullet in a student's life. Education can be what stops poverty, and education is a silver bullet for lots of students. And I'm living proof of this, right? So I am a first-generation American. My mother came from Argentina, like lots of immigrants, looking for a better life. I was born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York. So single mom in New York, in Hell's Kitchen, not the Hell's Kitchen today, where all the nice restaurants are, but the Hell's Kitchen back in the 70s and 80s, that Hell's Kitchen. And English is technically my second language because I showed up at PS 2011 and they said, welcome to PS 2011, and I said, okay. And so I had to learn English. So that was my background, that was my life setting, that's what I had to deal with. And through education, I was able to succeed. I got my graduate degree, I worked for Accenture, I worked for Mario Cuomo, I'm working at Google, I've been at Google for the last 7 years, and I've had this exciting, lucky career in my life. And my experience has gotten me to this point. And now I have two of my own kids, right? And I have an 11-year-old and a 20-year-old. This is where you're supposed to say I don't look like I have a 20-year-old. Okay, anyway, so I have an 11-year-old and I have a 20-year-old, and they're having a different experience than I have, right? My 20-year-old is in her second year of college, and she never asked me if she had to go to college, and I never told her she had to go to college. I never made her go to college. She just assumed she was going to college because I went to college, because her mother went to college, because her stepmother went to college, because everyone around her went to college. And she just assumed she had to go to college. She assumes she's got to go to graduate school because I went to graduate school, but she also assumes that I'm paying for it. But that's okay, right? That's the problem that we have. In one generation, education disrupted poverty, and my kids are okay. And it's great for my family, but it's also great for my community, and it's great for our nation as a whole. That's what we want. We want to be able to do that. However, with all the money that we're spending on education, social scientists are showing that the gap between rich and poor is actually widening. It's actually getting worse. And some of the data that we're looking at, some of the data that I've seen, shows things like by the time a kid is 4 years old, a poor kid has an 18-month academic gap between themselves and their equivalent on the affluent side, right? Or the fact that 6 out of 10 low-income fourth graders aren't doing math at grade level. Or the fact that you look at 30% of those kids that are growing up in low-income bracket, only 30% are applying for colleges, and only half of them are actually graduating. Right? So that gap is actually growing worse. And as a Latino, I'm specifically concerned about my community. Not just as a Latino, but as an American. Because when you look at what's going on in this space, you look at President Obama's promise or his goal to make us the world-dominant college graduation leader once again by 2020, which is only in a couple of years, right, if you think about it. But what people don't realize is that for this to be real, for this to actually happen, half of those 9 million graduates have to be Latino students. And when you look at the data, we're nowhere near that. You know, if you look at the fact that 13% of Latinos have a college, who are 25 and over, have a college degree or higher. So I'm in that group. 13% of us have a college degree or higher. And if you look at the numbers, there are 20 million Latino kids in our public schools today. And by the year 2020, when this is supposed to happen, 1 out of every 4 kids in public education will be Latino. So we can see that what we do with achievement gaps, what we do with education, is absolutely critical. We can see in our community, in my community, that this is absolutely critical. And so we need to do something about this. Now, sounds very pessimistic, but I'm actually very optimistic. I'm absolutely energized and full of hope because of what's happened with the web. If you think about most of history, where you're from, who you were born to, where you were born, your access to resources, your proximity to libraries determined what your academic success would be, determined your access to information, determined your access to education. And that changed. That's changed in my lifetime. That's changed in our lifetime. We had a library on 50th Street and 10th Avenue, the Columbus Library. That was our community library. We used that. Our students from schools all over our community used that library. That's where the resources were when I was growing up. And when you look back and think about that, that's where all our information was. And now all the information is at our fingertips. Think about the opportunities of that. Think about how we can use the web to level the playing field, because it is no longer true that information is restricted. Information is abundant, and we have access to it. And this isn't just happening in the US. If you look across the world, and you look at the 2 billion users of the internet, the 2 billion users that are using the web, half of those, 1 billion, are coming from developing countries or aspiring countries. Countries like Argentina and Brazil and Mexico and China and India and all these other countries where development is happening. 1 billion users are coming in those countries. And 73% of people who use the web don't even speak English as their first language. But then, you know, if you read some of the comment sections on some blogs, many of us don't speak English either. But that's again, another problem that we have to solve. And when you think about those billion users coming from these developing countries, that number continues to grow at a rate of 25% per year, versus developed countries, that's more like 5%. So that's where our users are. Here's a picture of a group of students in India using a Google Hangout to learn English. And one of the reasons I used this picture and why I liked it so much is because there was a quote from the teacher who said, now that we're using Hangouts, our students are more engaged and they find the information more relevant and they're paying attention and they're learning. And so the idea of relevance and engagement is a global thing. And this is happening across the world. Now, when we think about education and what's going on in this space, it's important to understand where we're coming from and why we are where we are today, and it's actually very simple. When we look at the 1700s, the 1800s, in the US and around the world, the US was basically, you know, a big giant farmer's market, right? We're a bunch of farmers, 95% of the jobs were related to farming, not a lot of education required. We moved into the 1900s, and by the time World War I came, we had the Industrial Revolution upon us. And 13% of adults had a high school degree by the time World War I happened. Again, not a lot of education required for the types of jobs that were being developed. Then we got into the 50s, into the 1950s, and we got after World War II, we found ourselves in a service economy, where a lot of jobs like accounting and professional services and entertainment and all bookkeeping and all these other jobs required some kind of college experience. And so about 20% of the jobs required some kind of college by the time World War II ended, which was okay because about 20% of the population had some kind of college. So it worked out. Then the 1970s came, and the computer revolution. And the computer revolution changed things dramatically in the 70s, where all of a sudden, excuse me for a second, I have to do a Rubio. I thought that's what we called it now. The 1970s came, and all of a sudden we had computers automating everything in factories and manufacturing and clerical work and administration work. A lot of things were being replaced by machines and computers and these types of things. And just as we were trying to figure this out, the 90s came, and the web revolution was upon us. Let me ask you a question that has always had a 100% same response rate. I've been asking this question since January. How many of you have not used the web today? Right. Think about how fast that's happened. I mean, I bet you many of you wake up, and the first thing you do is get on the web. Before your feet hit the ground, you're on the web. Right? And think about how fast that's happened. Do you realize that it wasn't that long ago that we used to have to call the internet with our home phones? And the internet was rude, and it would hang up on us. Or it sent us on a wild goose chase and gave us like 10 different numbers to use. And what was our reward for that experience? Our reward was getting on the web that had pages of words, that had links to pages of other words, that had links to pages with more words. And when somebody walked into the kitchen and pulled out that yellow phone off the wall and knocked you off the web, you lost your mind. That just happened in the last couple of years. And today, you're sitting there with your devices plugged into, you have your 12 devices all on Wi-Fi, and God forbid you can't watch a video on your mobile device at a conference where 5,000 people are using the web at the same time. You lose your mind there. That's happened in this short amount of time. And think about that impact and what the web has done for us. And it makes sense that education hasn't been able to keep up. We're in the space where we're still trying to figure out the 70s, and education hasn't been able to keep up. Where in 1950, 20% of the jobs required some kind of college. By the time 2010 came around, 80% of the jobs required college, and we were only graduating 30% of Americans with some kind of college, or with a college degree. So it makes sense that we haven't been able to keep up. Add to that this generation of kids that are coming into our school systems, right? Technology is not new to this generation. They're born into it. That cool smartphone that you have, that magic device that you think you have, is just a phone to a kid. And oftentimes, it's not even a phone. You want to play a good practical joke if you have a teenage kid? Shut off their phone part of their smartphone and see how many days go by before they realize that they can't make a phone call. And think about that device that you have in your hand, whether it's a tablet or a computer or a Chromebook or a smartphone, whatever it is that you have in your hand, that cool thing that you have. And then think about a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old using that device. And you need to realize that that device is the worst technology that they will ever see in their life. It's their Commodore 64. It's their StarTAC. It's their Apple IIe. They're going to find that device in a thrift store in the future and bring it back to their apartment and put it up on their wall like it's some kind of cool museum piece. It's the worst technology they're going to see. This is the generation of kids that are coming into our school system. And I need to make clear that I'm not saying that this generation of kids are different, right? You can read articles, you can read blog posts, you can listen to speakers talk about this generation of kids and how they're different. And how they think differently, and they can multitask, and they can do 4 or 5 things at the same time. No, they can't. They do 4 things poorly. They're no different than we are. But how they learn how to do things is different than the way we learned how to do things. And that's fundamental for us to remember. This is a picture of my 11-year-old. It's a Sunday afternoon, Sunday morning. I'm sitting on the couch trying to be a good, lazy American and watch football. And I think my 11-year-old is sitting there watching football with me. And I turn to my left and I see this. He's got one machine and he's playing Minecraft. Are you guys familiar with Minecraft? There will be hundreds of Minecraft rehab centers all over the country. He's playing Minecraft on one machine, and on his Chromebook, He's watching videos learning how to play Minecraft. And he's gone from this, learning, teaching himself how to play Minecraft, to collaborating and working with others, and problem solving and building things and being online and doing a Google Hangout and talking and doing all these different things and playing and being really good at playing Minecraft, to the point where he's now creating videos teaching other kids how to play Minecraft. And last week, he sat down with me and my wife to show us these games that he's coding and developing that other kids can take and download, and they can play in their Minecraft world. This is the generation of kids that are going through our school system. Learning does not happen for him between Monday and Friday, between 8 and 3, between September and whenever. Learning is constant and happens all the time. These are the kids that are coming in through our school system. And it's happening any place, anytime. And the web is where our kids get their resources. Can you imagine a 15-year-old coming up to you going, hey, I need to look something up. Where are the encyclopedias? Or imagine you doing that, right? It's where they get their information. It's where their resources are. It's where they build their relationships. It's where they manage their relationships. This is a picture of my 11-year-olds, my daughter, my wife, and my dog, and me. And we are all in 4 different locations. But you know what? We can have family night. We can have a conversation about our day. And this is what these kids are used to. And there's a generation of kids that are growing up this way. Any chance that I get to talk to kids, I take it. Any chance that I get to talk to kids that are growing up the way I grew up, I really take it. Because for a number of reasons. Number one, I think it's important for them to hear from someone like me who was in their shoes and grew up the way they grew up, and know that if I can do it, they can do it too, right? That's important for this generation of kids, especially Latino, Black, poor kids who need to see that for themselves, that it's possible, right? Absolutely critical. So I take that responsibility seriously, and I take it on, and I do that as much as I possibly can. And whether I do that in person when I get a chance, or I can do it in a Hangout, if you want me to come talk to your kids, I'll do it, right? I feel like that's something I can add value instantly, and I do that as often as I can. And when I talk to these kids, I offer a couple of things. One is I say to them, I make sure they understand that who they are and where they come from and how they're growing up, and their experiences can potentially be competitive advantage for them in the long run. They have a unique perspective. Their background is going to give them a unique perspective. But I also tell them, I don't tell them that they need to get their education. I don't tell them that they need to go to college. I don't tell them that they should grow up and be doctors and lawyers and engineers and those types of things, because they get to hear that enough from other people. What I tell them, or what I ask them is, I ask them what problem they want to solve. I ask them what problems do they face and what problems do they want to solve, and to go back and to think and to research about what kind of education they're going to need to solve those problems. And to go back to school and demand that they get that education so that they can solve those problems. We are asking a generation of kids that are coming up through our school systems to solve problems that we haven't identified, using technology and advancements that haven't been invented yet, in jobs that haven't been created. And I think they have the right to demand high levels of expectations for the education that they get, that they're going to receive. These are the generations of kids that are going through our system. And I talk to them about the skills that they need to build. And the first thing I talk about, or when I talk to anyone, is that we need to be able to create geniuses, creative people. You talk to any CEO, you talk to anyone in business, you talk to anyone anywhere, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a work-related thing. It's just we need people who are creative. Gordon McKinsey wrote one of my favorite books called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. I don't know if you read it. And when I worked at Accenture, I used to hand out this book. I used to buy them by the boxes and hand them out to my teams. And what Gordon McKinsey was saying in his book was that we're all creative. That we're all creative, and when someone says to you, I'm not very creative, it's because it's been suppressed somewhere along the line. And he uses this great example about how he used to go into schools because, among other things, he was a metal sculptor. He was an artist. And so he would walk into a school, an elementary school, and he would sit with first graders, and he would say, among other things, I am an artist. And I walk around your school, and I see all this great artwork. How many artists do we have in the room? And all the first graders would raise their hands as far as they could. They thought they were artists. And then he would ask the same thing in second grade. And about half the kids would raise their hand. And in third grade, about 10 kids. By the time he got to sixth grade, he would ask how many artists we had in the class, and maybe one kid would raise their hand. So either one of two things is happening. Either we as humans lose our creative ability by the time we get to sixth grade, or we're doing something in our school systems to kill that creativity. And we need to bring that back. Because like I mentioned a couple of times, we're going to have some serious problems. They're going to need some serious creative solutions. And so we need to put that back into our school system. I often hear people talk about how we need to teach kids how to fail. I don't like that word fail. There's something final about the word fail. I like the word iteration. Because iteration applies to good things and bad things. We need to teach our kids how to iterate. I play golf. I know, the hoodlum ghetto kid plays golf. Okay, I live in Phoenix, and everywhere I walk, there's a golf course, so I wanted to learn how to play golf. So I play golf, and I like the game because it's very challenging to me. And one of my favorite expressions in golf is that every shot that doesn't go in is a bad shot. And what I like about that expression is that it doesn't matter if you hit a tree or if you hit it 300 yards down the fairway. The next shot is an iteration of that shot and just as important and critical as the shot before. And that iteration that we need to build into our students, whether they're successful or whether they are bad at something, that iteration is important no matter what you do. And so we need to build that skill set in our kids. We also have to recognize that teachers we're freeing teachers from the idea that they have to be the big magical box of information and all knowledge in the classroom. We live in a world of abundance information, and information is at our fingertips. Teachers no longer have to remember everything so that kids have to memorize things, right? When my kids ask me a question that I know they can search for and look up, I remind them, I say, let me try to explain this again. I work for a search engine company. I am not actually the search engine. Go look it up. Now, the next step is more critical. It's my responsibility to follow up, to ask them, what did you find? Where did you find it? Does it make sense to you? Is it credible? How do you know? Well, how does it apply to what you want to know? How does it apply to what you're learning? All the questions related to what it is that they're looking for. It is my responsibility to do that follow-up so that what they're searching for makes sense, so that they're learning how to search, that they're looking for the right information. Right? Information is not the same thing as intelligence. Information is abundant. Information is available. Intelligence is priceless. Intelligence is what we are after. And how do we take information and turn it into intelligence is what we should be focusing on. We often talk about collaboration as a critical thing, but we don't take it very seriously in education, because education is an individualized sport, and we live in a team-oriented world. And students go through school, they go through a class, they go through a grade, they go through a level, and then they graduate, and we push them out the door, and we say, all right, you're all done. Go work with others. Good luck. And we need to build that collaboration back. And collaboration is more than just working with others. It's understanding others. It's being able to make sense of other people's perspective and being able to apply that perspective to what you learn and being able to see expertise in someone else and apply it and having the confidence to actually know that someone else might know something more than you and you can take something from that. Can you imagine as a teacher, you handed out a test and the kids went and took the test, and at the end of the test, 2 kids came up to you holding the test together, saying, we did this together. What would your reaction be? When did collaboration become cheating? Imagine applying that to my world. Imagine me going up to Larry or Sergey or anyone on the Google leadership team saying, here's the strategy. I did it all by myself. Nobody helped me. We don't live in that world. We need to teach kids how to collaborate, how to work with each other. We also need global problem solvers. And we don't need just people who can solve our problems today. We need to have kids build the skills that help them identify what problems they need to solve. Problems that haven't even been identified. I forget this guy's name, but he's, he gets into this is a quick story, he gets into his car, and he does something that we all do on an everyday basis. He drives to the dry cleaner, picks up his dry cleaning, goes to get some fast food, and goes back home. We do that on a regular basis. The difference is that this guy is 95% blind, and he's in one of our Google self-driving cars. So we want to focus on solving problems that we might not have identified as problems. But if you're blind, or if you can't get around, and you live in a community where that transportation is available to you, this is a lifesaver. And so we need to be able to build that skill set in our kids so that they can identify problems that need to be solved. We also need leaders, digital leaders. And notice I didn't say digital citizens. And I think that's one of your bingo words, so hopefully nobody got bingo today because of me. But digital citizenship is absolutely important, critical, get it, absolutely. But what we need to do is build digital leaders. So what kids post online, what they share online, how they collaborate online, everything that they do online is the reason why they get that internship, the reason why they get that job, the reason why they go to college, not the reason they don't. And we need to build that into our kids so that they have the information that they need so that they become leaders of their digital portfolio, that they become leaders of that information so that they're not just consuming the web, but they're actually creating original thought for it. And that they're actually sharing that original thought and growing and learning from it. And we're starting to see this paradigm shift in lots of different areas. You look in higher education and what's going on in the space, and I'm sure you guys attended maybe some of the MOOC sessions. You look at what's going on in higher education, and there's some interesting things going on. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's important to pay attention to it. We have a world now where we recognize that having more than a high school degree is important. We recognize the importance of some kind of post-secondary training, whether that's college, an associate's degree, a certification, something that is beyond your high school degree. Absolutely critical for success. We recognize that now. But we also recognize that we have to be able to provide high quality, low cost, if not free, if I have it my way, material and education material available to students. And we also need to be able to provide that in lots of different formats, but the web and how we've matured with the web is that vehicle that helps us provide that. And we have devices that get us to the web that are cost effective, that are cheap. And we have a generation of kids that are growing up comfortable living in that digital world. I think about my my college daughter, and how when she was in high school, she was very social with her friends on Facebook, and then I realized that she will never lose her high school friends. They'll always be part of her life. They're always connected. And so why aren't they learning from each other? How are they not collaborating? How are they not communicating? How is it that they take that relationship and move it to the next level? These are some of the things that we're seeing in this space, a very comfortable group of kids that are comfortable learning in different ways. And it's just a matter of time before this evolves into how do we assess this, and how do we create mastery around it, how do we create assessments around it, how do we certify it? So that we get to the point where someone like my daughter, who's going through a traditional model, can actually be in charge of what her learning looks like and kind of paint her own picture of what it is that she wants to learn, so that by the time my 11-year-old goes to college, he's not going to college in the same way that we think about college, that he's learning, maybe taking a semester somewhere, or maybe taking a couple months doing this and doing all these different things, and eventually putting this big package together where he's learned something. And in the K-12 world, we're seeing teachers evolve into this space where they're becoming designers of doing, right? Where they're actually taking these new learning models and creating these unbelievable new scenarios. Where all of a sudden now, this generation of teachers, if you are a teacher in the room, sorry to put this burden on you, but you are the responsible ones who are going to create the new paradigm of what learning will look like in the future. Right now, what you guys create, the methodologies that you come up with, the ideas that you create, the platforms that you build, this is what we're going to be using as an education model for the future. And so when we think about the role of a teacher, it's actually more important going forward than it was in the past. And we need to develop great teachers. We need to give them the right professional development so that they can take the web, they can take the technology, they can take the methodologies, they can take the research and the data and all that stuff and make sense of it and be able to implement that. And I looked at some interesting research from a Pew study, and they were looking at, they were talking to AP teachers and NWP teachers, and they were asking them about their use of digital tools in the web. And some of the stuff was encouraging, right? So 92% of those asked said that the web has become a major force, a major impact in how they teach and what they teach and where they get resources. 92% of them said that. 60-something% of them said that they actually use those same tools to interact with other teachers and collaborate and build even better stuff. But 85% of them also said that they're doing it on their own, right? That they're learning these tools and they're learning how to use the web and they're learning how to use these digital tools on their own in their own time. So there's a disconnect between what we're doing in the professional development world and what these teachers want to know. And we need to bring those two together. And at the same time, recognize that this has to be across the board. One of the things that I have to pay attention to, because I'm interested in it, is making sure that the digital tools and the web is being utilized by affluent schools and those schools not so affluent. And making sure that it's across the board, right? And that's something that we have to pay attention to and make sure that we do. And I looked at the same data and it said things like, 70% of those teachers living, working in affluent schools were utilizing the web, but that number was 50% for teachers that weren't in affluent schools. And we have to make sure that both numbers are even. So we have to make sure that we're building great teachers, because at the end of the day, the teacher in the classroom is the most important element, the most important factor in the kid's education. And I know this because I had a pretty interesting career. I've met some interesting people. Vint Cerf, the guy who created the internet, is one of my mentors. And when I sit and meet with him, he writes things down, and it freaks me out when he starts writing things down when I talk. And so I've had some interesting people in my life, but at the end of the day, my 4th grade teacher, my 6th grade teacher, my 8th grade teacher were probably the most influential people in my life. And that doesn't change. The role of the teacher is absolutely the most critical component of the education process. And so when you look at the web as a learning platform, we're starting to see some interesting things. And I can throw 1,000 different examples, and you guys have different examples, but from the work that I do, I get to visit lots of schools all over the world. I get to talk to lots of teachers. I get to visit classrooms. And from my experience, in these types of relationships in the US, I'm seeing interesting things. Like, here's a school in Vermont that is in their history class, using digital tools to do everything from do the research to creating websites to creating the collaboration and the tools and everything all in one package, to the point where reporters are actually using their stuff as resource in reporting, right? Or one of my principal friends at Leiden High School, recognizing that communication and collaboration and the tool sets and the skill sets that I talked about earlier are critical for their students in education, but also he recognizes that the web is this advancing platform that they need to take advantage of. And they're building those new models in their school systems. One of my favorite schools is Richland II in South Carolina that I had the privilege of going and visiting back in December. And the picture I showed earlier with the kids in the classroom that all raised their hand when I asked them if they had any questions, I went to go visit their students and talk to their teachers. they're doing amazing things with these new learning models. And you walk into a classroom and you see these groups of kids working here, and this group of kids working there, and this teacher working with individual student over here. And it takes you a couple minutes to recognize what the creative chaos looks like. And all of a sudden, as you're standing in the classroom, a kid just pops up, comes over to you and says, "Hi, my name is Tim, and you just came into the social studies class, and we're learning about Civil War," and whatever else it was. And that kind of experience in these classrooms is just amazing to watch, and the energy that you feel and the excitement that you see in the classroom happening, very cool stuff that's going on. And when you think about the web and what does the web mean, I was talking to a student today. I did an interview with a student reporter from one of the local high schools, and I asked her, like, do you use the web in school? And she goes, no, but I use Gmail. And so recognizing that the web is all these different components, from a Google perspective, we have some stuff that's going on, right? So we have Google Apps for Education, and Gmail and Calendar and Docs, and these things are part of our communication and collaboration package for infrastructure things, right? Or we have YouTube for schools and YouTube in education, where I say, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, what's a great education video worth? And teachers being able to pull these education videos and plug them into their learning environments and into their content, and just amazing stuff that's being created in this video world. Or we talk about Chromebooks and how Chromebooks can help you manage and scale technology in your school systems, or Android tablets and how you can use Android tablets for mobile learning, and we got apps and reading material and all these cool things that are going on from a Google perspective, and things that you might not even know about, like the Google Wonders Project, where you can visit ancient worlds and modern worlds and dive in. And I dove in there with my 11-year-old son, and we got into some stuff that was going on in Spain and Italy, and guess where he wants to go for our summer vacation? I should have looked at New Jersey. Or the Google Art Project. Are you familiar with the Google Art Project and the fact that we have 150 partners in 40 countries, that none of us could ever visit every museum in the world, and now brushstroke level detail in our face where we can see some of the art. And I still want to go visit museums, but I'm never going to be able to visit every museum. And these are just some of the projects that we're working on. And Google Hangouts, where we're growing a generation of kids who say, I don't understand why I can't just do a Hangout with an astronaut while he's in space. And these are the expectations of kids that are growing up in this world. And Google is just a slice of that pie when you think about the web. And these are just some other examples. And again, you guys have hundreds of other examples of tools that you're utilizing in education. I think about the Pixton and how they're using comic books to create communication and storyboards. And this is really cool stuff that they're doing, that they're building, right? Or Compass Learning. And I know a school in California that's using Compass Learning to do self-paced learning. And there's other tools that do this kind of stuff. Or ST Math from Mind Research, that I don't know if you're familiar with, that's using some really cool tools with their Penguin to teach kids problem solving, so that these kids are actually learning by not taking tests, right? They're learning because they're able to solve problems and get immediate feedback and be able to adjust that feedback so that they can create new solutions. And they're getting all this in an intrinsic way, mind-blowing stuff that they're doing with no language. And the important thing to keep in mind, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Chrome experiments, if you visit Chrome experiments, you'll see some cutting-edge stuff using mostly open source code, and people working on projects that are bending the edges of the web and the capabilities of what we can do with the web. And we're just getting started. This is the very beginning of this. And so visiting these sites and seeing what's possible and thinking about what we're doing today, and think about, again, the fact that we used to call the web on our phone, we used to call the internet on our telephones, and think about what we do on the web today. Imagine what we're going to do 2 years from now or 10 years from now, and what that platform is going to look like. Martin Luther King said that the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically, and I couldn't agree more. This is not easy when you think about what we have to do in this space. We have to transform a really traditional model into looking at models where we're taking and leveraging great teachers using relevant and engaging content and involving students so that they're part of their responsibility, that they're part of what they're creating, they're part of what they're learning, and using technology not as the end-all silver bullet, but as an enabling and supporting capability wrapped around good policy that's common sense and makes common sense policies that we need to have in place. This is not an easy thing to do. These are holistic changes that we're asking for. But there are 2 billion people on the web today, and we're just getting started. And already the web has democratized information. It's made it available. It's made that library on 50th Street and 10th Avenue irrelevant. And I think about the possibilities of what's next and what we can do in this space, and I couldn't be more excited about where we are today and more excited about what the possibility of what the future holds and what it looks like. And so I'm really, really, really excited to be here, really excited to engage and talk with you guys, and I'm really excited about what's possible in the future. And I have some time for some questions if you have, but I'm done. Any questions? Yeah, I think there's some mics up there if you guys want to use the mics.
What is your opinion about web filtering in schools as far as limiting YouTube and other
Did somebody set you up for that?
No, but love to know.
So I think that there is some need for filtering. There is some need for control, right? There is some need for responsibility. I don't think that, I'm obviously a huge fan of YouTube, and I don't think that we should be filtering YouTube, right? That being said, I think what we need to do is that idea again about not creating not only digital citizens, but creating digital leaders, right? I took a risk with my 2 kids and said, I am not going to put any filters on you or any parental guidelines or anything. I'm just going to teach you how to use the web and hope that I teach you well. And I think that's the way we should focus on. And here's the other thing about that. We can put those filters in place and we can do all those things, but like any good student, like when I was 12 years old and was able to pass notes around and do all the bad things that I was supposed to be doing when I was 12 years old, kids get around that, right? So if you're blocking and filtering things on a school website, but they have it in their pocket, what does that mean, right? So I think that what I'm excited about, though, is that if you asked me that question 3 years ago, I would say that's happening everywhere. I'm starting to see more freedom in this space, and the potential is overwhelming, so I'm excited about that.
Yes, I do have to admit I work for the Texas Education Agency, so I'm giving that out first.
This is not a TA
No,
AA
the question I'm going to ask is about testing, that big T word that we all kind of look at. And one of the things I keep on hearing from teachers, and because of the other nasty word in education, Nickelby, with the whole thing where testing seems to be the be-all and end-all.
Yeah.
And when you try to institute a lot of these really, really interesting programs, administrators and everybody else come back and say, yes, but can we prepare them for the end of course, or in Texas, the STAR exam?
Right.
So my question is Google doing anything to help? I'm not allowed to lobby, it's against the law, but is Google going to be doing anything to kind of change the mindset of government officials so that perhaps we can get away from having the entire month of May at a high school not involve testing?
Yes, and that's a great question, and I'll answer it this way. We have enough learning, we know enough about learning now to know that we all learn in different ways, right? We all agree to that? How I know this is because when I was a kid, a teacher or someone would explain something to me and in words, and I wouldn't understand what they were saying, and then they would explain it to me again, and then they would just do it louder the next time, and I still wouldn't get it, and then they would get frustrated, and then they would say, what, do you need me to draw you a picture? Right? Remember when that was an insult? What's the answer now? Yes, I need you to draw me a picture. So we have enough evidence that shows that we learn in different ways. So we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense that if we all are learning in different ways, then we all go into a room and take the same test in the same way? That doesn't make sense. And so I think that some common sense stuff is happening. I think that the developers are building tools so that when we're using these tools, that we can do mastery assessment, that we can do some kind of evaluation along the way so that we get immediate feedback. Another thing about testing is like if you take a test, what are you measuring? You're measuring that day, that point, that you could have had a bad day, right? How do we know whether the teaching that you're using is effective over a long course if you're only doing a spot-in-time kind of snapshot assessment? Right? And I think these things are starting to make sense, and I think some of these tools are being built where the assessment is part of that. You look at ST Math, for example, and that's continuous feedback assessment going on the whole time, right? And you can't move on until you master. You can't move on until you get better at something. And so I'm starting to see some of that kind of development happen, so I'm encouraged about what the possibility of the future is. Again, I have a reality distortion field, and so I'm hoping that's what's going to happen.
Can you talk a little bit about the intersection and how Google connects private and public schools?
How Google connects?
Yeah. How would we use technology to connect the haves and the have-nots a little bit better across the platforms?
Okay. So first, let's make sure that we identify that private and public schools. There's great public schools, and there's great public schools, and there's bad public schools, and there's bad public schools, and there's great charter schools, and we all know that, right? And there's bad charter schools and so forth. And I think one of the things that we want to be able to do is, again, we want to build great teachers. We want to have professional development for great teachers, but we can also utilize technology for lots of different things, bringing experts into the room, bringing teachers that might not necessarily you might not have access to, being able to do classes together in a collaborative way across different school boards or different schools, or bringing students together. I know many teachers who have examples of one class partnering with another class. It could be in another part of the world working on projects together. So I think what technology does is that it helps kind of not necessarily level the playing field, but it gives more opportunity to have those types of connections and interdependency.
A lot has been said about the personalized and the adaptive learning in the last 3 days, ever spoken about it. Also the big data thing, but in all fairness, Google is the biggest big data company out there. What are you guys doing in the field of education?
Yeah, I actually don't know. I can actually be cool and say, oh, I can't talk about that. But I think it's an important thing, right? I think more importantly, what we need to look at is what data is out there and how do we utilize the data? And from a Google perspective, obviously we look at lots of different data, but we don't necessarily, there's lots of developers who are creating their own data. And I think what we need to look at as a whole, as a community, is how do all the different applications and all the different things play together? We're making sure that the data is secure, making sure that it's private, making sure that we have good terms of service in place to make sure that the parent knows what's happening with that data. I mean, those are the things that we should be concerned about and think about, and I think we need to focus on that.
You talked earlier about the limitations of language, right? I see in the last couple of days, I've seen so much of free content that's available in the field of education. But in terms of the language limitations, if you showed even a picture of school kids in India. So how is Google helping, or what are your thoughts on how we can overcome that barrier of there's so much content available, but it's all in English?
Yes. A couple of things about that. Machine translation is one of the hardest computer science problems to deal with, right? Taking something that's English and translating it, for those of you who've ever tried Google Translate, right? Taking English and Spanish to English, we get like an 80% rate on that, right? And most Latinos will laugh at those translations. If I talked that way, my mother would slap me. But anyway, so that's hard enough. So imagine taking English into Spanish and Spanish into Arabic and Arabic into Mandarin and Mandarin back to English and back to Spanish. What's that sentence going to look like at the end of that travel, right? And so that's a hard computer science, but we have some of the smartest people that are working on those translation issues, and I'm excited about that opportunity. At the same time, it's a great opportunity to see what other things are going on. I don't know if you're familiar with an organization called Duolingo. right? So Duolingo is an interesting kind of a idea, right? So they're doing crowdsourcing learning. I think they're up to 6 languages. They have 1 million users, 100,000 every day that are on there actively learning a different language, right? So those that might speak English learning to speak Spanish. And what they're doing is they're taking content from the web and translating it and then crowd developing it together, right? So that the answer is right. And so they're doing 2 things. These students are learning another language, and at the same time, they're translating those documents into that other language so that they're available for those students that speak that language. So things like that are really exciting, right? Because you can actually do 2 things at the same time. You can teach language, and you can translate those documents that need to be translated into other languages. And I think right now they're at 6, but I don't see why it can't be 46, right?
Hi.
Hi.
I just want to mention something that doesn't really seem to be coming up here at all, but I know is really the biggest problem for people in some of the toughest schools. My mother happens to be a middle school teacher in a big urban district, and her biggest problem in trying to use some of this great new stuff that's available is hardware.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all the software.
Sure.
She, in fact, used to do more several years ago, but with budget cuts and with money going so much to a lot of the new things and going out of the toughest public schools,
Right.
now, the few computers that actually work at the school are so old that they really can't run any of the new stuff, and her personal computer can't even interact with them.
Right.
So she's really kind of at a loss and finds herself very, very frustrated because she just can't. She's very aware of this, very motivated to use it all, but she just can't do it. And like most teachers, she spends a lot of her own money for supplies and stuff, but she can't buy computers for the school or update them at the speed that they need to be updated.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if that really has that much to do with Google, but I just kind of wanted to
No,
throw it
but
out there.
but here's the thing on that. I personally care about that issue, right? So I want to make sure that all kids have access to this stuff, and it makes sense. And whether kids have access in school or whether they have it at home, and making sure that they have access wherever they are. I think devices are getting cheaper, which is a great thing. I think that for me, what's really important is making sure that the devices and the technology is scalable, that it's easy to use, that it becomes invisible, that it's not the focus of what we're doing in the classroom, right? So we don't, talk about desks, and we don't talk about chalkboards, we don't talk about textbooks. We shouldn't be talking about technology, right? It's what are the new learning models, and how do we utilize the technology to support and enable these new learning models of what we want to do and what is it that we want to teach. And so hopefully, we recognize, and I think lots of schools, it's promising to see lots of schools recognize that broadband and technology has to be part of their infrastructure. And again, we want to get frustrated, we want to, rip our hair off and make sure that we focus on this, but we're just getting started, right? So we're just at the beginning. And so we want to make sure we stay on top of it, but the promise of it is exciting. That I think that we want to make sure that the technology is available, but we have to make sure that it scales. We want to make sure that that you can manage this. You want to make sure that you can put 50 machines in a school, and that you can put 50,000 machines in a school, and that it's scalable and manageable, that it doesn't fall apart, and that it gets in the way of learning. We don't want the technology to get in the way, right? So it's not about the individual device, it's about the individual using the device, right?
Thanks.
Cool. Any last questions? All right, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Excited to be here.